Dear Marianne Williamson, as you gave us our charge this morning, and Tim Ryan, what are the burning questions in your heart? And Marianne, we'll start with you. The questions about the changes that you see need to happen, and your wonderings about how this group can help make that so.
Well, I think to the extent to which this group represents those who are interested in a spiritual journey, I think a little bit of a, not a conundrum, but a situation facing the modern seeker, Western seeker, is that we've allowed ourselves to be infantilized. To be wise is to be an adult, is to be mature. And I think one of the reasons that, in a way, the modern spiritual community in this country is not taken as seriously as it might be as a cultural impulse is because we don't take on the questions of evil. And by evil, I mean genocide, other, situations of terrible, terrible human suffering. So I think that the social potential here, and that's why with someone like you here, Congressman, who is dealing daily with the very serious issues that our country faces and that our world faces, this itself is a very good interface because I think it calls all of us to be more aware, something like the military veterans, et cetera. So I think that I don't know about burning question because I don't live with burn, but I do see it as a moment of opportunity, and that those of us who take the spiritual life very seriously, it's like I said earlier, Buddha would not have become enlightened had he not seen human suffering. In the Old Testament, there was the slavery in Egypt before the deliverance to the Promised Land. In the New Testament, it's the suffering on the cross. So to me, for the modern spiritual community, which this is part of, to be taking in the serious questions that are not easy, that are not convenient, and that represent the painful things that we have to hold in our hearts and then to act on, I see it as a great moment of possibility.
Thank you. Congressman Tim.
I would say that the question really for me and for all of us is, what kind of country do we want to have? Do we want to have a country like we have today that operates from fear, operates from anger, operates from very high levels of stress, or, and not to be corny, do we want a country that operates from love? And to me, it seems like if we're so frustrated with the current state of affairs, and we all know this is coming from a place of fear, if you have, $5 million, you're angry that the person next to you has 10, and you're fearful that someone's going to take your 5. The level of fear with inequality in the country that Marianne so articulately talks about in places like Youngstown, Ohio, and Cleveland, Ohio, and Akron, Ohio, where people have to live in fear in so many ways, to me, is unacceptable. It just doesn't have to be that way. And part of the magic of this conference and what we've been talking about all week is there is an opportunity here to elevate how we all think, that there is hope, that this is not a hopeless case for us to end poverty. That's not a dream, that could be a reality. But we have to move from the vision of this can happen only by pure rampant capitalism and profit based on fear and anger to the only real major successful social movements, like the civil rights movement, happen through nonviolence, reducing aggression, and Martin Luther King said it many, many times, from love.
Yeah, but we've kind of heard the hope thing before. And Martin Luther King, in addition to the nonviolence as process, there was very specific political activism that he took. And when you say to us that we can end poverty, you, Congressman, certainly know that until we get public financing of all federal campaigns and a constitutional amendment to override Citizens United, can we honestly say there is a hope? to end poverty, as long as moneyed interests wield the kind of undue influence on our political system that they do?
No, absolutely not. But that's a fear-based system that we are working under now. And I think the opportunities that we have here is to create a alternative vision that isn't based on the fear of elected officials to have the advantage of incumbency. So they don't want public funding of campaigns because they're afraid that they'll be on an equal playing field with an opponent. If you each get $100,000 to run from the public, which I am for, and I've been on the public funding bill since my first minute in Congress. But right now, the incumbents have the advantage. You have the power incumbency. You can raise millions of dollars, where the new person who tries to get in the race, you all of a sudden would be put on an equal playing field with them. So that, again, is a system operating and people operating from fear.
I want to base in just a step in here. The combination of love with specifics to answer the question, what kind of country do we want to have? That's 2 syllables. What kind? 3 of country. 5. Do we want to have? Really ask the question. Yes, Marianne.
Yeah, I'd like a democracy again. I'd like a democracy because it's not just what you said just now about the incumbent. It's not only difficult for anyone who's not an incumbent to get into office, it's difficult for anyone who doesn't have money to even run for office, and it's difficult for anyone who's not a Democrat or a Republican to run for office. It is the deterioration of democracy itself. We in America, I think we're living in it much like an alcoholic family system, where the children know something's really wrong, and like too often we're not saying it. And I mean, I'm all for the hope, and we all feel it, and I think we've all voted for it. But at this time, given the fact that neither Democratic and you have signed the bill, you have signed, and I really acknowledge you for that, but the leadership of neither the Republican nor the Democratic Party are taking a stand for public funding or even at this point for the constitutional amendment. We need to go beyond just the conversation about the theory, and I'm all for philosophy. I spend my days doing it. But at a certain point, we need to talk about what are we going to do about this, Congressman, because at this point, American democracy, we are changing the social contract from a government of the people, by the people, and for the people to a government of a few of the people, by a few of the people, for a few of the people. And that, if that's going to happen, it should at least be accompanied by a vigorous debate.
Yeah. And I don't disagree with it. All I would say is that we do not have, you're not going to get enlightenment in Washington, D.C. if you don't have the awareness level and consciousness level raised of every American who goes and votes. And until we do that, Martin Luther King, and you know this better than I do, Marianne, and these are the conversations we have when we're alone, so we're just kind of letting you in the room.
We're being a little bit nicer to each other because you're here.
We only have microphones on now. That's
we're not
difference.
saying the words that we say.
There was a social movement that moved the legislation in the Civil Rights Act. It came from the ground up. And all I'm saying is, and why I'm here and why I'm pushing mindfulness in the schools and how to jujitsu the veterans so that they can go out and continue to do it, and why it should be in the healthcare system and in the prisons and everything else, is because I believe that will, in and of itself, raise up the awareness level of people in the country, and they will look at the system of financing our campaigns and have a little bit more attention to pay to that, to put on that, and then we will change it. Right now, it's not in there. It's not in the average you know how many people sign this public finance bill? There's like 50 in the House. So obviously, constituents from around the country aren't contacting their members of Congress to say, sign this bill.
Tell everybody to do it right now.
Go call your member of Congress and tell them to sign the public finance bill.
There's an action. Thanks for bringing it back into the room.
And if they don't, Marianne Williams is going to call them up on their house phone.
Because you're going to give them the number? Well, they can look on the internet. Yeah. Theoretically, they could certainly know how to look it up on the internet. But I want to say something about the way Martin Luther King is spoken of in these contexts. Gandhi articulated the principles of nonviolence. Martin Luther King went to India, he studied them, he brought them back for application to the civil rights movement of the United States. It's very, very trendy now to see him as someone who was just talking love all day. He was also risking his life day after day in order to stand up to power and tell truth to power. Let us not kid ourselves about what Gandhi and King did. King definitely, it was all about, what King said was that the desegregation of the American South was the political externalization of the goal of the civil rights movement. And the ultimate goal was the establishment of the beloved community. But he didn't skip over the desegregation part and move right into the beloved community part. That's not transcendence, that's denial. And so I think it's really important that we remember that because, and I'm not saying you're doing it, and I'm not saying anyone here is doing it, but I'm saying it is part of a larger necessary conversation. How too many people seem to be thinking, well, if I just love enough and I just meditate enough, I don't have to get the grit under my fingernails and do the seriously inconvenient political work that too often both major political parties are resisting on whatever level to make these things happen.
Well, just a moment. I need to, every time people start bringing Martin Luther King Jr.'s name into the conversation, I need to just stand up and say a little bit more about that.
Okay, good.
And I will speak from having been the Associate Director of the Martin Luther King Jr. Papers Project at Stanford University.
Wow, cool.
When King came into the civil rights movement, because it existed before he was born, the women started the civil rights movement effort that King came into, and he came in reluctantly. I'm saying this because those of you who are sitting here, I don't know how many of you in this audience might be the next Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but some of you might very well be the women who started the Montgomery Improvement Association, who were looking at what was happening with the buses in that community and with the segregation and said, no more. And the teachers who organized and created the whole campaign had organized the neighborhoods, had the flyers ready to go. When the right person would come into the scene, sit on the bus, as Sister Rosa Parks did, and said, I'm not getting up. They looked for the church to have that first meeting in. And all of the established preachers said, oh, no, not here, not in my house, not in my backyard. And Dr. King, who was new in the community, said, no, not here. And he said no 3 times. And finally, they came back and said, no one else will do it, you must. And he said, okay, fine. And they said, good, because the sisters are already distributing the pamphlets that are saying it's going to be at your church. That's what you can do. That's what you can do. And so I want to bring this conversation about what's going to happen in Congress right here, and what's going to happen in your home office. What's going to happen in your organization? What is going to happen as you become clear about what needs to be addressed? So we can continue at that level, but I just wanted to bring it on home.
I think it starts with a lot of the things that are already happening. I mean, I think the Vets Corps thing obviously would be a huge first start. And then how do you work on legislation that can help ramp that up in a big way, but use the NGOs and nonprofits to get it started. Same with mindful schools, where Megan was here. I mean, imagine, I feel like I'm just trying to sell these things to you, but you already know or you wouldn't be here. But imagine what the Baltimore boys could do with $1 million. I'm not saying all at once. I know you got to ramp it up. You got to build the infrastructure and all of that. And there's probably someone in this room that could help them. And imagine what they could do with $1 million. Imagine what Megan could do with Mindful Schools if they had $1 million. Imagine what IRES could do with $1 million. I mean, these are the kind of things that are transformational, and I think that's the path. It's maybe not the civil rights movement, civil rights legislation tomorrow, but it is beginning to engage, because it's a different system. The media's fractured, and that people's attention span's not there. So it's going to have to happen in a very organic way, but I think there is a path forward when you hear the 3 separate programs that these soldiers and Marines were talking about. You look at the different mindful programs, you look at the different yoga programs. I was at the VA with some very interesting things actually going on in the Los Angeles VA I was at the other day, where they got an innovation grant. You go in there and they're doing mindful movements, mindfulness-based stress reduction, healing touch, Tai Chi, and to have a 45 or actually 60 or 65-year-old Vietnam veteran come up and say, "This has saved my life," and saying that we got to talk to the young soldiers who are up here today and say, don't wait 40 or 50 years before you get this kind of help, to me signals that there is something happening, and if we could just ramp it up, that we will get the change we want.
I agree.
And that's because they embody something different than the current mood of the country, and that's where the shift begins.
I agree with everything that you're saying, and I'm sure everyone here would. But I feel, and I think other people do as well, you talk about what kind of a country we would have. What kind of a country we would have if enough members of our Congress had been mindful enough never to give George Bush the ability to go fight that stupid and immoral war so that men like that would never have been sent there. If that mindfulness is necessary in the U.S. Congress, that mindfulness is necessary in the executive branch, that mindfulness is necessary in the Supreme Court. Yes, is it important among us? Absolutely. But right now, this is the problem we have. Obviously, we have many. Mindfulness, you can have a conference like this. The whole conversation of mindfulness represents the best that America can be. And so this mindfulness is pouring itself into business. It is pouring itself into education. It is pouring itself into religion and spirituality. And it is not pouring itself into politics, because right now the Democrats and the Republicans have it so sewn up that without public financing, the most mindful among us don't want anything to do with politics. And until we break that stronghold and that chokehold, then we're going to be talking about people who are experiencing the effects of this insanity, making them more mindful so they can survive. We've got to stop the insanity.
Well, that's why I'm trying to. I know, and the George, I mean, that's in the past. I mean, there's nothing we can do from it but learn from it. And so what do we do now? And that's why I come to conferences like this to say, and that's why I do the yoga votes and go to their conferences, because there are people who are aware that don't get involved in politics. And what I say to crowds like that is that you can't be a yogi and want to be one with the universe except that dark spot called politics. And so you're not allowed to do it.
So I want to step in. Go ahead.
And so part of the process of building a mindful nation is for us to engage the people who are paying attention, who are aware but have said, "Out of hell with it," to get in the process. Not just support the kind of programs I said, but obviously get in I mean, Yoga Votes is an amazing organization. Now, I'm friends with, the people that are doing it, Sean Korn and Carrie and everybody, so I have an affinity towards it. But they are organizing yoga studios for people to go out and vote. Now, that's what we need. That's how you have a transformation, is you get people who are less inclined maybe to get involved, but the exact people that you need in the debate. Because even if they disagree with you, I'm a liberal, they're a Republican, but they're a yogi, they're going to come to the town hall meeting and recognize that us screaming and yelling at each other, A, isn't going to get us anywhere, and B, is only going to increase the level of aggression in the country when we need to take out and remove some of the aggression in the country. So these are the kind of things that I think help us build that movement. And as I said at the opening remarks, if you have mindful schools in which the parents go, and that same parent goes to a doc who's going to say, go do mindfulness for 20 minutes in the morning before I give you a prescription drug, and the guys coming out of prison have practiced some practice and mindfulness awareness practice in prison, so they're less inclined to go back in. The after-school programs that the Baltimore boys are doing, the VA, you have these soldiers coming back, going in the classrooms. You begin to see how the fabric of our country can change, and all of those people, Democrat or Republican, are going to go vote for somebody who is going to be for policies that aren't going to be war and are going to be peace.
This is not a but, this is an and. But what you just said about prisoners is the same. Did I say the right? It's not a but, it's an and. Okay, what you just said about prisoners is very similar to the issue of vets. It's not just helping vets, it's making few people fight a permanent military situation. We have 2.4 million people imprisoned in the United States today. That is a higher incarceration rate than any nation in the world or any nation in history. During the 1970s, we had 300,000 people in prison. And out of the 2.4 million people who are incarcerated today, 500,000 of those are nonviolent drug offenders. And building prisons is one of the largest urban industries. This whole situation is called, in many cases, this cradle-to-prison pipeline. We have 23.1% child poverty rate in the United States. Among 38 nations in the world, we are second only of the more advanced. We are second only to Romania in our child poverty rate. There are whole elements of our society, so many segments of our society, in which the social and the educational and the cultural and the socioeconomic conditions of these childhoods make it probable. We have among African American men today a 1 in 3 probability at some point of lifetime probability of incarceration. Among Latino men, 1 in 6 lifetime probability of incarceration, and among even white American men, a 1 in 17, which is very, very high. So once again, it's not to in any way minimize anything that you're saying about how we teach mindfulness to prisoners, but we need to deal with the fact, the extremely unmindful behavior that has made a situation in which it is so probable that so many Americans are warehoused and incarcerated to begin with.
And Marianne, I'm going to ask you in a moment to speak about how, through the Sister Giant program, you were talking about building the kind of leadership that will address some of these issues. I'm going to ask Mike to come forward, and if you have something to add, or a decus or a question, begin to line up, because we have less than 5 minutes left. But if you can speak some about the Sister Giant program, because then you're not just letting people know about the issues, but you're cultivating a body of people who can address them.
We did a conference in Los Angeles. We'd done the first one a couple of years ago, was Sister Giant, Arousing the Sleeping Giant of American Womanhood. The one a few months ago in Los Angeles was, although it was live streamed, and there were women from 50 states. All 50 states were represented. It was called Sister Giant, Women, Nonviolence, and Birthing a New American Politics. And what we've got here is a situation where if women are running against men, statistically, because we love those statistics in this conference, if a man is running against a woman in a political race in the United States, the woman absolutely has as much chance as the man does to win the race. The problem we have is that women are not running for office, and that's why we have in the U.S. Congress fewer than 20% women, and in our state houses as well, fewer than 25% women. So women in the United States have a little bit of an internal glass ceiling. An internal glass ceiling, and I think part of it is because the toxicity of politics. This is why it's so great to have people like you here and among us, people that we can relate to, and I mean it, and I love you. I think the toxicity of politics, the mean-spiritedness of politics, makes it not just for women, but for anyone on a spiritual journey, someplace where we don't even want to go. So the idea is how to create, of course, a new politics, much as you were saying, where we're really not against anybody. We're standing for a new possibility for the United States and the world.
Absolutely. And we have the mic here, and some of the participants, the attendees who want to lend their voice, but I do want to give honor to you, Marianne, and I want to give honor to you, Tim, about the way that you bring both the strength, and then, Tim, how you're living your grandpa's legacy of having the strength to be gentle, in the way that you also hold up those efforts that you see that are meant to bring forward that kind of world. I know you have a poem you want to read. We will hold that one, but I really want to hear what the people here would like to add to the conversation. Yes.
Marianne, I'm so glad you're here. And by the way, everybody here should read the book called Culture of Narcissism. I just want to say, judging from the almost standing ovation you got when you said that what we really need to make any other reform possible is publicly funded elections and the 28th Amendment move to amend. All this awareness that's going to happen in this session will go for naught unless people can move it to action. So at the very least, since we're at a technology conference, everybody take out a pen or put it in your iPhone now, these 3 websites. United Republic, it's the coalition of all the organizations working for publicly funded elections, unitedrepublic.org, and movetoamend.org, and fixouramerica.org or .com. If you really want to do something, get involved with those organizations, whether you can give them $5 or whether you can give them your time. Of course, if you're a programmer or designer, that's really the people that can make the most change. Those are the organizations you've got to get connected with. And to quote Tony Kirshner, I'll leave you with this.
I need to thank you and have you
I just want to say, Tony Kirshner said that the highest connection of putting our religion, our policy, our philosophy, our spirituality is politics. It's the one avenue of human pursuit that puts it all together.
Go ahead and, yes, thank you. We have 25 seconds. Anyone else have just one quick comment?
Well, it's a question I'm going to ask you. You can respond if you want to. Thank you, all of you. The debate sounds to me something like top-down versus ground-up, and I wonder if it's sort of a false dichotomy, and if that conversation actually doesn't do so much good, actually, to create action. So I see action more as like top-down is sort of like moral impetus, I have to do this. Ground up is sort of like we're all doing this together, and it only comes through a process anyway. So, yeah, sort of like the people in Congress who are going to act, they're going to feel it from the ground up. They're going to feel.
And what's your question?
What do you see? Is that true? Is that true? How do we actually get Congress people to act in a sense from the ground up, whereas they don't feel like the I have to comes from the inside, or am I? Or is this part of the culture of narcissism that they got?
Thank you.
This is America. This is America. You're an American citizen. You're not on the fucking ground. This is America. They're not up there and we're down here. The American Revolution was fought so that we don't have a king. We don't have an aristocracy. We have subconsciously recreated the condition. We have turned the American corporations into a new aristocracy, and we're acting like a bunch of serfs. Even talking about ourselves like we're down here on the ground. You're an American citizen. You're an American citizen, and every American citizen is a leader. And the governance of the United States of America is in the hands of the people of the United States. There is no up and down in the United States. That's what the point is of America.
And on that note, I'm so sorry. I am holder of the time, and I'm just going to have to hold this time. These two dear ones, yes.
I'm certainly not going to try to match that. Because she hit on a point that I think is a great way to end, and that is the great story of the shaman who was in the woods, and this guy thought he was going to trip up the shaman with a question. And he was telling his buddy, and his buddy said, well, how are you going to do that? And he says, well, I'm going to take this bird and I'm going to put it in my hands. And I'm going to go to the shaman and I'm going to say, is this bird in my hands dead or alive? And his friend said, well, what's that going to do? He says, well, if the shaman says that the bird is dead, I'm going to let the bird out of my hand and it's going to fly in the air and the shaman's going to be wrong. And if the shaman says that the bird is alive, I will crush the bird, open up my hands, and the bird will be dead. Either way, he'll be wrong. So this kid and his friend went to the shaman, brought it to the shaman, had the bird, and he said to the shaman, is this bird that I have in my hands dead or alive? And the shaman said, the bird is in your hands. And the points that we made in this conference and the actions to follow are in our hands.
I'd like to say something. One of the things that we've talked about here is the profound responsibility that comes with being an American or citizen of any of the advanced industrialized nations. The responsibilities, we are stewards. You are a steward of your industry. We are stewards of American democracy. And every generation has its chance to make its stand on what this narrative should be in our time. And I hope that that everybody at this conference is very clear, particularly in comparison to the majority of the people of the world. To be a citizen of the United States or of any industrialized democracy, to be in industries such as the tech industry, to be participating in technology, to participating in these conversations about where American democracy goes well. Somebody asked me not too long ago to speak at a women's empowerment conference. And I said, a women's empowerment conference, that sounds so 90s. I said, what do you mean women's empowerment conference? She said, women need to feel their power. And this is how I feel about women and men. You want to feel your power? Use your power. That's where we are now. You have so much of it. Even among women, when we think of women's issues, yes, not every struggle has been won, not everything, whether it's about color or race or anything like that. It's not like every struggle or every battle has been won. However, we have so much already that I feel what this moment is calling for is not so much that we ask for more power, but that we use the power we have. And it begins with realizing how much we have and using it on behalf of those who do not have as much as we do. If we do that, this world will change so much.
Thank you, Marianne. Thank you. And so we close this session with this call, this question that you will take into your tribes. And because of the timing, the tribes will not meet over here, but we will meet over lunch. But with this question that you've set us up for perfectly, what is it that you have a clear sense can be changed now and that you feel moved to actually change? And let's just take a moment to let that sit. Thank you, Sister Marianne Williamson. Thank you, Congressman Tim Ryan. We have some surprises over lunch that you will want to wait and make sure you hear about. But let's give a big round of applause.
And to you, Rachel Bagby.
Thank you.